Hi there, welcome back to the last video in our attempt to represent or model all of the PMBOK, all of this beautiful stuff on one page. So what you've seen is that we've gone from the processes in yellow and the outputs in green, and now we're adding the tools and techniques in white. And so we've done initiating and planning, and now we're going to move on and do executing, controlling, and then closing. And then you can see that we'll have a kind of a model, a picture from the beginning to the end of a project with the connections or the flow, if you want, of outputs becoming inputs and outputs becoming inputs and outputs becoming inputs as we get all the way to the end of the project here. So let's have a look at execution. And you can see here the direct and managed project work has the usual. It's going to be expert judgment, it's going to be meetings, and it's going to be the project management information system here. So nothing more that I can really add to that. But now if we look at managed project knowledge, now the outputs that we're going to look at there, kind of straightforward, knowledge management and information knowledge. So information management becomes knowledge. So recognizing that there's ways to manage information, but there's also ways to manage knowledge. Now knowledge is extra. So data is kind of noise. Information is useful, but it's things I already know, you already know. Knowledge is extra. I did not know that. And therefore it's a subset of that. Okay, and that's what we're trying to do here. So let's have a look at the resources now, for example. Let's go have a look at acquire the resources. Okay, so acquire the resources, you can see here, we have, interpersonal and team skills, of course, as we would have here. And decision-making might help us. But we also have pre-assignment. So this has always been around in the PMBOK, that there were things in previous PMBOK, but there has always been things pre-assigned. They've already been assigned to the project, so therefore there's no decision needed. Now, virtual teams is something we're all very familiar with now, but it is relatively new to the PMBOK. The idea that virtual teams, although a lot of people would love to get back into the proper teaming that we had when we were all together in the same room, but this is what virtual teams might help us. Now, the primary one that's going to have a lot of tools and techniques is develop the team. And that's where you get into your motivation, your conflicts, your Maslow's, your Hertzberg's and stuff like this. And so ironically, it's kind of, not ironically, I suppose, but it's interesting that given this year of COVID, that co-location. So we miss it terribly, of course, with the students that I teach as well. We're missing being together in a room. We're missing that kind of banter, that ability to interrupt each other. And so co-location has been a bit of a challenge, but it's a benefit. If we can do co-location, it's a real benefit. Training, of course, will be useful in terms of developing the team. Recognition and rewards coming from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you remember that. Maslow had his hierarchy of needs, and reward and recognition was level 4. Communications technology, interesting one to see, given that we're using COVID. In COVID, we're using Zoom, but also Teams, and whether you're going to use, Blue Jean or something else like that in the future. Individual and team assessments, that makes sense, doesn't it, that we would do that, because that's an interesting thing, because we actually do want to do the team performance assessments, so we have to be able to do that. And again, virtual teams, so that's a technology or technique, if you want, that some people might consider is useful. Let's have a look at quality and see what's the benefit of using tools and techniques. So what would I have as tools and techniques? So the first one, and I think it's very apt, is called audits. We're going to see audits in 3 areas. We're going to see it in risk, in procurement, but also in quality. Now we're auditing the process in this case, and that's what prevention is all about. Now we might also use problem-solving techniques like spin and coin, and other techniques that you might hear about. Interesting one that they've introduced in the last PMBOK was design for X. What is the thing? Is it for safety? Is it for cost? Is it for simplicity, as in the case of Apple? But you get the idea. Volvo would be, X would be safety. We design everything for safety. Apple, it would be simplicity, and not for safety. Of course, it would be different. And quality improvement methods. Okay, that's going to be helpful as we're using tools and techniques to do this. Let's have a look at managed communications. You can see now that we're going to see a couple of interesting ones here. So project reporting, how are we going to report on the project? Those red, amber, green kind of things. Is it bar charts? Is it some kind of a hybrid of that. Now we have the communications methods that we mentioned earlier, and the communications technology that's available to us if we're working globally. Years ago, that was maybe more of an issue than it is today, but there was a time when people didn't have fax machines or didn't have the internet or didn't have email. But of course, we all have those now. Even a 5-year-old kid has all of these. And actually, younger people sometimes don't want to use the older technologies that we have. And communication skills, of course, very powerful to have good communication skills in managed communications. Now we can see here that in conducted procurements, we have the bidders conferences is a great way to have it. Sometimes it's mandatory that you do this. The point of the bidders conference is that there's fairness between the people bidding for the work. So that should be something here. And then also advertising to make sure that we get the right people and enough people in to have a competitive bid. So that's the idea of conducting the procurements. Now we have managing the stakeholder engagement. I almost said expectations, but it's not. We're managing the stakeholder engagement. And I suppose an interesting one there is ground rules. For many of us, that's the norms in the Tuckman-Jensen model. So it's forming, storming, norming, ground rules, and then performing and adjourning. So the ground rules becomes the norming. We agree those ground rules for how we're going to manage the stakeholders, particularly if there's large numbers of them. And again, communication skills just kind of popped in there, a bit like in other ones as well. It makes sense to have good communication skills. I'm not sure it's a tool and technique, but you get the idea. They put it in here. It's kind of an attribute. It's a skill that you would like. So we now have initiating, we have planning, we have executing, mindset change. We're now into the metric kind of part of it, the circular part of it. We're doing the controlling like a lighthouse going around. You can see here we have quite a few tools and techniques to help us. Okay, so we see expert judgment, expert judgment, expert judgment. But also we'll see some meetings, not a huge amount, but we'll see some meetings. Most of the meetings have been back over here. So monitor, control project work. You'll see the expert judgment, you see the meetings, you see the data analysis, and you see the decision making. Now again, perform integrated change control, very similar. And so you have the data analysis and the decision making, but one extra one here, which obviously makes sense, is the change control tools. So what are the change control tools that we're going to use to help us to keep track of all the changes that we're making that are approved or rejected or postponed? You get the idea. Okay, control the schedule. You can see quite a bit going on there. So let's have a look and see what they expect from us under control the schedule. And of course, the first one would be to reuse the critical path method, the one that we used when we created the schedule in the first case. So that makes sense that we would know that. Now also to use leads and lags. And again, we used that when we're creating the schedule over here. So now we're using it again. It's a bit like a hammer or a saw. We're using it again. Another is schedule compression. Again, we looked at that when I mentioned crashing and fast tracking, and we use that again. And that's what I meant about, you see these things, analogous estimating, analogous estimating, analogous estimating. And here we're seeing, schedule compression and schedule compression happening here. One other one, resource optimization, which we saw back here as well. And we see resource optimization being put in here. Okay, so no big shock really. It's very similar between here and between here. Just interesting that we're using the same tools and techniques. Now we're trying to produce what's called a schedule forecast. In this case, with control costs, we're trying to produce a cost forecast. And one of the techniques we might use is called the to-complete performance index, which is a useful technique in earned value management to calculate the rate that we have to go at to end up at the time and budget that we said we would when we set out on the journey. So the to-complete performance index is kind of a useful technique. When I'm talking about monitoring risks here, you can see the usual kind of, we have meetings and we have data analysis here, but we do have this other one that I mentioned earlier, which was audits. So I mentioned we're going to see audits in procurement, we're going to see audits in risk, we're going to see audits in quality. So we'll do auditing here, it makes sense. Now, controlling the resources is kind of interesting because in this case, we don't control the human resources, we control the non-human resources. And that's what we're doing here. And the technique to help us to do that might be problem solving, some kind of a root cause analysis technique, an Ishikawa diagram, a fishbone diagram, as I mentioned, coin or spin would be a problem solving approach to help us to get to where we need to be. Okay, let's have a look at control the quality. Control the quality, we have two, and the obvious one that you'd expect is inspection. Okay, we're going to inspect the products, we're going to inspect the outputs, and we'll do that and see what comes out. And then testing and product evaluations. Okay, so that makes sense that we'll have the testing and product evaluations. So now let's have a look. Monitor communications, nothing really to add beyond what's there. The usual stuff here. Control procurements. We have a couple of interesting ones here. And I think it won't be a surprise to you when I say audits, because I've mentioned it a couple of times now. So we're doing an audit of the procurement process to ensure that everything was going well, and auditing so that we continue to use those vendors and the next time we do it. Inspection, okay, very similar to quality. Part of the procurement is that you have to do both quality assurance and quality control, but you also have to do validation as well. So we have to check that if we're doing the procurements, that it is complete and it is correct. Remember, we said control quality is about completeness, validate scope is about correctness, but when we're doing control the procurements, it's about completeness and correctness, and therefore the inspection and the audits help us to do that. Claims administration, a very useful one as well. So perhaps if there's going to be some claims on the contracts, that's when it gets quite serious. This is the legal side of project management, and quite a difficult one for those of you if you've been involved. Monitor stakeholder engagement. You can see meetings and you can see the data analysis and data representation, decision-making and interpersonal skills. So a lot of human stuff going on here, but also communication skills been put down there as an extra. So we'll add that in there. Okay, we have one more to go and then we are done. So validate the scope. We're now inspecting something different. So this is inspection as well, but in this case, we're inspecting the completeness. In this case, we're inspecting the correctness. So there is a difference, even though they're both inspecting. This one, it's inspection of the correctness. That's what quality is about, and therefore it becomes verified. In this case, we're inspecting the completeness. Once it's complete, we can say it's accepted, and therefore we close the project over here. Now you can see in close the project, there will be expert judgment to see that everything's okay, the meetings and the data analysis, and then it's closed. So this is the PMBOK. This is also the PMBOK. And what I want you to see is that you can open any page and you can sense that it is from somewhere on this map. And that somehow we can go from the book to the map or from the map to the book. And that would be a useful way to see all of the beauty and the content and the flow of the PMBOK. And so it doesn't become overwhelming. And so there shouldn't be any of these little cards that you're scared of. You should be able to pick up any yellow one or pick up any white one or pick up any green one, or even look at the key. And nothing here would surprise you. Nothing here would surprise you. When you have done that, then you can start the other levels of the formulas for earned value, the dead people, you know, your Maslows, your Hertzbergs, your McGregors, your Demings, your Durans, those kind of people. You add all those people as well. And then you're ready for the exam. Good luck. Hope to see you at some point on one of the other videos, but I've enjoyed showing you the project path.